Hi, this is Monique Lombardelli, and you are listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. Back in the 1980s, architect Richard Meier got a commission for a series of buildings in Los Angeles. The Getty Foundation, sourced from the prestigious family of oil fame, wanted a huge new complex on land they owned off the 405. This would turn out to be one of the largest private commissions in the world at the time, costing about $1.3 billion by the time it opened in the 1990s. Of course, the neighbors fought it, as neighbors do with just about anything modernist, but now it's a source of pride for all of Los Angeles. If you're into architecture, art, history, or research, the Getty is a must-see modernist complex. All white, of course, that's a Richard Meier thing. Admission is free, and it's an astonishing accomplishment and gift to the world, especially the gardens. On the show today, we've got Chandler McCoy, Senior Project Specialist with Conserving Modern Architecture Initiative. Later, we'll talk AI with Michael Gilbride and how it's affecting design. And although Justin Shubo sneezes at the mere mention of his name, here's your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, folks. One of the questions I get in email all the time is, "Hi, George. I'm going to be in X city. What modernist building should I go see?" If you're talking about a town like ours, Raleigh, North Carolina, it's a short list. Dorton Arena, the Hunt Library, the Blue Cross Trapezoid, and mid-century houses in Carolina Country Club, among others. But for LA, New York, Dallas, and other big cities, there are many types of organizations that sponsor tours and or guides, some for a fee, some for free. For example, in LA and Palm Springs, you can hire a guide to take you and your friends in their vehicle to see some incredible modernist houses, some of which, if you're lucky or pay extra, you can go inside. International cities like London have free guide programs. People from that area volunteer to take visitors around, usually where they live, for a day or half a day. I've done that in London, and it's delightful. But then there's Chicago, no better place in the world for architectural tourism. From the charming architectural tour boats that take you along the waterfront to see the skyscrapers, to the walking tours, to the Segway tours, if you want to see architecture and design, you can, nearly every hour of nearly every day. There are even tour buses that will take you from Chicago to Plano, Illinois, where you can see the wonderful Edith Farnsworth House by Mies van der Rohe, if the Fox River hasn't flooded it that week. And many AIA chapters offer tours during the year in fall and spring. In the U.S. Modernist newsletter, you can track special modernist events. Just sign up for the newsletter at usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Chandler McCoy grew up in Clearwater, Florida, the pride of Largo High School.
Go Packers!
After graduating from UVA
Go Cavaliers!
and Columbia University,
Go Lions!
he joined the National Park Service.
Go Trees!
Smokey? After working with the Presidio Trust in San Francisco, which is like playing on the Durham Bulls, in 2015 Chandler got called up to the major leagues of modernism, the Getty Center in Los Angeles. His new job was running the Conserving Modern Architecture Initiative, which helps important modernist buildings get properly restored. According to an ancient legend, if you look into the mirror inside an Eames building and say "deferred maintenance" 3 times, Chandler McCoy will appear. Welcome, Chandler. Is that true?
Thank you, George. No, most of what you said is nonsense, but whatever.
It's like Beetlejuice, Chandler. I just say deferred maintenance 3 times in my modernist building, and you show up. That's how it's supposed to work.
Okay. Well, okay. No one told me that yet, but...
So before we talk about the Getty and your current work, You did the whole architecture thing in the beginning of your career. What had you switch from that to more preservation?
Well, yeah, I went through the whole architecture. I went to undergrad and graduate school, and I got my architecture degree, and I studied for the licensing exam, and I got licensed in New York State, where I was living at the time. And then I was working in architecture offices. But I eventually found a job at the National Park Service, and it was kind of a fluke because I had a friend who was working out in Santa Fe, and she asked me if I wanted to work for the National Park Service for a 6-month gig, and I thought that sounded like a lot of fun because I was getting a little tired of living in New York and needed a break. And I went out there and worked as a historic architect for the National Park Service in the Southwest, and I decided I really liked that role of, the stewardship of historic places, and I guess I found it a little more satisfying than working in architecture practice and private practice doing commercial buildings, which is what I'd been doing.
Did you get to work in a park somewhere, like Yosemite?
That was the Rocky Mountain region. I was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I did some projects in New Mexico, and I had a really interesting posting out in Buffalo River National Recreation Area in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas, where I was documenting a ghost town that had been a former mining town. I did a project at Carlsbad Caverns. Actually, on my return to New York, I stopped at Jean Lafitte National Park in Louisiana. So I saw some interesting places, and that stuff was really cool. And then I discovered, start longing for New York City again. I discovered there was the same organization had an office in Manhattan on Wall Street, and I got transferred back to New York and continued working for the Park Service in the New York metropolitan area, where I was doing things like Statue of Liberty and Grant's tomb and other interesting...
Who is buried there, Chandler?
Grant is actually buried there.
Okay. I've always wondered that question.
Wife, Lydia, or whatever her name is. Yes, Grant is buried in Grant's tomb.
Okay.
And it had a very leaky roof, a weird conical-shaped stone roof, which I got to climb around on. Anyway, so
deferred maintenance. There we go.
Yeah.
That was deferred maintenance, I tell you. So, at this point, I was working on really interesting projects. I really liked the fact that these historical places were, part of the history of the U.S. and part of the fabric of New York City, and I found that much more engaging than residential and commercial new construction. And so by that point, I decided that historic preservation was where I wanted to be. So that's where I was. And then the same friend who I went to UVA with had subsequently moved from Santa Fe out to San Francisco. And then she said, hey, there's a 6-month temporary job for a historic architect in San Francisco and at the Presidio, which was an Army base, and the Army was leaving. And this is like one of the most beautiful Army bases in the world. It's right at the base of the Golden Gate Bridge.
It's right in the middle of town.
I should note here, as a Star Trek fan, it is the future home of Starfleet.
Yeah, I know. There was a whole sub-base called Fort Scott, which had been claimed by the Trekkies.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it was like 1,500-acre site with 850 historic buildings, and the Army was leaving, and it was being converted into a national park, but it had a lot of real estate that needed to be managed, a lot of historic buildings, as well as some quite old adobe buildings from the 18th century that had been part of the original Spanish fort. So anyway, I thought that sounded too good to pass up. I went out for my 6-month job, and I ended up staying there for 19 years and watched the transformation.
You must have been there during the time that George Lucas built his facility.
Oh, yes, I was involved in that. I wrote the design guidelines for that. They tore down an old Army hospital on that site. It was an 8-acre site. George Lucas was the first tenant to come in. And there wasn't a lot of new construction Mostly it was rehabilitation of these beautiful Army buildings and barracks and all sorts of different types. But he actually built a new campus. The hospital was obsolete and had some serious seismic problems. But that was one of the few building areas that was actually torn down. And he built like a very large, it was called the Lucas Digital Arts campus, subsequently, I guess, purchased by Disney. But anyway, yeah, that was a big thing getting Lucas in there. He was a major tenant. His organization paid a lot of money in rent for that land, and it was an important step in getting the Presidio to be financially self-sufficient, which was part of the deal. It had to pay for itself, and so it wasn't like any other national park. So it was very exciting. It was very gratifying. But after 19 years, I thought that there weren't any mysteries left there, and this job opened up at the Getty. I work at the Getty Conservation Institute, which is located at the Getty Center. A job opened up 8 years ago. I applied for it. Now I'm managing the Conserving Modern Architecture initiative. So kind of in the same area of historic preservation and architectural conservation, but exclusively focused on modernism, which we all love, and I've loved for a long time. So it was a job that allowed me to bring together my two major professional interests.
And one of your most successful projects, which I want to talk about in a little more detail, is the conservation of the Eames House and Studio in Pacific Palisades in Los Angeles. Did you come to them, or did they come to you to get that ball rolling? How does that kind of project start?
Yeah, that was a kind of a nice coincidence just at the moment when the GCI decided to launch this Conserving Modern Architecture initiative and start focusing on modern heritage. The Eames Foundation arrived at the door and said, "We've got some modern heritage and we need some help with it." So it was the perfect moment. There was a really interesting story. The LACMA Museum, LA County Museum of Art, had this show that they were putting together called California Design, and they came to the Eames Foundation, the Eames House. The Eames Foundation runs the house of Charles and Ray Eames. They operate it as a house museum. Just sort of left it in the way that Charles and Ray left the house after they died. Anyway, the museum said, could we borrow a few pieces of Eames furniture from the house to put in our exhibit? And the Eames Foundation said, how would you like to have the entire contents of the living room, which is a fairly large space? And the LACMA ended up building a model to scale of the Eames living room and put all of its contents in there in the middle of the Resnick Pavilion at LACMA. And it allowed the Eames Foundation to empty out the contents of the living room, which had not been empty since 1949, when the Eames moved in, and it allowed them to take care of some of the deferred maintenance that you mentioned earlier. It allowed them to put in a new floor, correct some of the water problems. There's a paneled wall along the west side that runs along. This is a big 2-story space. So having it full of furniture and the priceless possessions of the Eameses made it kind of impossible to really take care of. So with the room empty, they were able to do a lot of major work on the house, and that's how we got started with them. We assisted them in some of their investigations and did some of our own and started working with them in this partnership. And that's the way that GCI works when we work on a field project. We don't pay for the work. We provide technical expertise to support them. They fund their own projects, and we work with them as a sort of a technical partner. But
so you make sure that they get their money's worth.
Yeah, we make sure they get their money's worth. We try to help them develop solutions. But, in this case, we just love the place. It kind of got swept up in the spirit of the place. I don't know if you've been there, George, but
yeah,
it is
I have.
One of the icons of modern residential architecture in the U.S., and it's really easy to love. And we all do. So we've had a very nice and collegial relationship with the Eames Foundation since 2012, actually. We're kind of winding down now. We did this conservation management plan for them, which was our big contribution, I would say, which is a kind of a document that will guide their future work on the house. And so they took it and they're running with it. They've hired an architect. They're developing a master plan, doing fundraising and so forth. So I feel like we sort of set them on the path, gave them good information, and now they're charging ahead with the work. And, there's a lot that needs to be done. It's a beautiful place, but it does need to be, now that it's not a residence, now that it's a museum, it has to be obviously treated differently. And the contents of the house, it's not just furniture and knickknacks. Now that's a museum collection that needs to be cared for in a certain way. And we've focused a little bit of attention on the environment of the house and the collection to help them with not just architectural conservation, but some of the textiles and the furniture, and they have art on the walls. And this is an all-glass house, so it gets a lot of sun. So a lot of the things in the house are subjected to sun and humidity and dust, and anyway, on and on. But I would say, yes, it's been a very successful collaboration, and I feel like we've really helped them out in that way.
And this conservation plan, is this like the warranty booklet you get with your car that says like, okay, in 12 months you got to do this, and in 24 months you got to do this? Do you get out ahead of the building and let them know what they're going to need to do in the future?
Well, actually, we did in this case. At the final chapter, we developed priorities for them within 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, just pointing out some of the things that we thought were most important. And those things, the house is surrounded by beautiful and extremely large eucalyptus trees, and that's one of the things that gives it its character. It's this glass house in a grove of trees. These trees are old, and they're potentially quite dangerous. So some of the priorities were things like do an assessment of the trees and remove hazardous trees or cut hazardous limbs, or don't let the hillside slide in a landslide, and, simple things like that. But I think it helped them that we did establish priorities, and that's what they're working on now, like just securing the site. And we live with potential wildfire in California, things like that are kind of urgent. So I think they knew that already, but it really helped them to have a guidance from us.
When you work with an organization, a foundation, a group on a building, how do you get their mindset to move from a sort of maintenance-based approach to a conservation approach? How do you get them to shift their habits?
The thing that we try to convey is a sort of a long-term picture of a house or a building, that you need to think about the long term and the end game, which is keeping the building standing for a long time. So you need to sometimes pull back from the little things and look at, like, are there structural issues? Are there pending problems? Like, are the trees about to fall? It's not that the building owners don't know what the problems are, but I think we can help them sometimes prioritize them.
Are there mistakes that can be made if you don't have your guidance while you're doing maintenance?
Yeah. When you're doing treatments to historic materials, that's science, and that's material science. So you have to know what you're doing. Not so much an issue with the Eames house, but concrete, reinforced concrete, one of the most common building materials from the modern movement. And it's a very difficult material to conserve. It when it fails, it can be quite dramatic. It fails in peculiar ways.
And it's hard to fix invisibly.
And it's very hard to fix invisibly. And like the concrete industry is always promoting these patches and sealants and all sorts of things that haven't really been tested over time. And so there are some tried and true approaches to concrete, for example. And there's some things you can do to concrete that will make the problems much worse. So a lot of our work is this kind of technical guidance, so that if they're working on a particular material, they can make decisions in a rational way and not cause any harm by using methods that aren't well known. I mean, of course, we like to see people retain the original materials and not make substitutions, and we place a value on that.
But you just can't go down to Home Depot and pick up any old thing and fix it.
Not at all. And it's really complicated. In fact, I gave a talk. I guess I missed you at the AIA convention.
Yeah.
I gave a talk on Friday about related to conserving modern university campuses. And one of the questions in the audience was, well, that's all well and good. We all want to do the right thing, but I can never find any skilled contractors or masons or woodworkers or metalworkers who know how to do this work. And I was completely at a loss by that question because there's no answer. I mean, you can't just go to Home Depot and buy a can of something and
spackle,
smear it all over your spackle or some kind of waterproof coating. That could create many more problems than the actual concrete or whatever. You could be sealing in water.
Yeah.
I had a roommate who tried to cover up holes in the wall with Gleam toothpaste. It has the little crystals in it.
Yeah.
And he wondered, what? Oh, you saw that? Yeah.
Yeah. We tell people probably not to use toothpaste when they're trying to fill cracks in a concrete wall. Yeah, you can do a lot of damage if you don't know what you're doing. And the products that are on the market, they're not necessarily going to work. And there are a lot of companies promoting products that can really do a lot of harm. So it's a complicated business.
I would think, Chandler, that you would become a center for all these artisans and specialists.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, don't you have a Rolodex full of all the people that know how to do this stuff?
No.
Really?
No. And I wish we did. In fact, I was thinking at this conference, or this turned into a bit of a conversation based on this person's question, like, how can we support and find skilled craftsmen who know how to do this work and teach them the skills? And yeah, it's really hard to find, and there aren't that many who do it. So yeah, that might be a future project we do someday. I don't know.
I would think that an organization with the power that the Getty has could put out the call for these specialists, and they would answer.
Yeah, or we may have to train people to do things that they don't know how to do yet.
Or bring people back from the dead. That's what you got to do.
That's it.
Reanimate these guys who have passed on.
It's too bad they didn't have YouTube, like in the 60s.
That's true.
Because they would have been making videos that would be helpful to us now.
Perhaps. Although I'm not sure all of those YouTube videos are really helpful. But,
no?
But maybe that's a role that the Getty plays, is to kind of screen out all the nonsense or the noise from. Anyway, yeah, that's a future thing that we might work on. It's a pretty good question, actually, because you can talk all you like about what needs to be done and the right way to do things, but if you don't know a contractor who knows how to do it, you're kind of stuck. So, yeah.
In our archives, we were surprised to discover that we were the first group to list builders on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And people thank us for that all the time because they look up these builders, many of which have gone out of business over the course of 80 years.
Yeah.
But they find that their son or grandson is still around, sometimes doing the same business, and can pick up the trail where their grandfather left off. That's always a good stroke of luck.
Oh, yeah, that is good. Yeah, what you're doing is really important, and we talk a lot about the thing about when you're in the field of modern conservation, you have access to living memory, to people who worked on these buildings or to their business partners or children or family. You don't really have that with any other period of buildings. You can't just go talk to the guy who designed the Gothic cathedral in your village and ask questions. You can do that, though, Charles and Ray, for example, they're no longer living, but we had access to people who worked in their office and worked on the construction of the house. And that kind of stuff is incredibly important. Like you said, you can find out who the builder was, and you can maybe ask them what they did and how they did it. And conservation of modern buildings is very challenging, but there are a few things like access to the original designers and the original builders, and you don't find that with an older period of building.
So I have a building for you, Chandler. This building was opened in 1997 It cost $1.3 billion. It's almost 30 years old now. And I'm wondering if there's any deferred maintenance that you need to pay attention to with this organization.
Well,
we're talking about the Getty Center itself.
The Getty Center, yeah. No, you're right. The Getty Center. It's a work of a famous modern architect, Richard Meier.
There's a lot of concrete.
There's a lot of concrete. There's a lot of travertine, and there's a lot of painted metal panels, which was Richard Meier's sort of signature, these metal panels. And the campus architect, Naomi Neville, actually asked us to help. These painted panels, some of them aren't in very good condition, and obviously they're 25 years old, and the paint, it's a Kynar finish. It's a factory applied finish, but it's starting to fade, and when the panels get dinged or impacted in some way, it's hard to fix them. So we helped them a little bit with that, figuring out who they might hire. We connected them with a good local architect that specializes in technical things like this. So, yeah, sometimes they ask us some questions about, for the most part, the Getty Center is in good condition.
Yeah.
It's only 25 years old. When it's 50 years old, that's probably when things are going to start turning up. I think the lifespan of a modern building is, you never know how it's going to behave. The climate is pretty decent in LA, but there's an awful lot of sun, so things fade. So, yeah, I'm sure there'll be all sorts of problems that present themselves in the future. But that's for somebody else to deal with, I guess.
Now, if you want to see a movie called Inside Baseball, like Details, one of my favorite architecture films is called Concert of Wills, Making the Getty Center. Have you seen that one?
I haven't seen the whole thing. People talk about it quite a bit, but it's like the battle between all the big egos responsible for the Getty Center.
It's great, and you can still order it on DVD. Remember DVD, folks? You probably have a player in your attic somewhere. But if you just want to watch like how the sausage gets made in a very high-profile project, it's a fascinating, fascinating film. I think they sold it in the gift shop of the Getty for a while, but now you can just get it on eBay and other places.
It's a good film to watch if you want to know. The Getty Center, they started planning it in the mid-'80s.
Yeah,
it took
84, 85.
A decade. But today, during the spring of this year, they celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Getty. But it still feels fairly new, and it's in quite good condition. It's a beautiful place.
And the landscaping is just breathtaking.
Everyone really should visit this, and it's free still, right?
It's free. Well, you have to pay to park your car.
Yeah,
but that's true everywhere in LA. Yeah, it's free. You get on the little trolley, you come up the hill, and it's a beautiful spot. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the landscape, because it's not just about the architecture. It's the setting, it's the views, and the landscape is beautiful, and it makes it a very pleasant place to work.
Now, Chandler, there's another modernist program at the Getty called Keeping It Modern. What was its original direction, and how has that changed?
Yeah, the Keeping It Modern was one of the programs of the Getty Foundation. Getty Foundation is the philanthropic arm of the Getty, which is different from the Getty Conservation Institute. But the two departments worked in concert for this one, and it was about taking clues from the Conserving Modern Architecture initiative. The Keeping It Modern gave grants to people who owned important modern buildings, and it provided funding for doing preservation planning, writing CMPs, and things like that. Sometimes they gave a little money for construction, but mostly it was about planning. So it was a way to promote long-term thinking and management of modern heritage sites. So like we did for the Eames House, we wrote a CMP for them. This money funded, I think that over the year, it was a 7-year project. Unfortunately, it's finished now. That's the way the foundation does things. They'll focus on one area for a limited period. Over the years, they funded these planning studies. And the thing about the money was it went to planning, but it also helped people to focus on taking care of these places. It brought them a little bit of notoriety. It helped kind of galvanize public opinion, and the people who owned the building felt like they were being supported. They were getting good advice that allowed them to assemble a team of professionals. So it was a great program. We were all very sad that it ended, although now, for the next 2 years, there's a kind of an extension that's called Preserving Black Modernism. And this is a joint venture between the Getty Foundation and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They have a group called the African American Cultural Heritage Foundation. So the Getty is working with them to do grants very similar to the Keeping It Modern thing, which was an international grant program. This is for Americans to kind of elevate the recognition of Black architects who were working in the 20th century. And so they've just announced 8 grant winners, I think, for this first round, which was announced a completely new grant program. So we're pretty excited about that. So Keeping It Modern is no longer working, but now there's a focus on American modernist architecture. And they've got a really interesting group of 8 grantees for this Black modernism. But it's really about raising awareness of the role of Black architects. They were kind of forgotten when the canon was written, but within this grant program, there were churches and universities, and I don't think there are any residential buildings, but it's going to do a similar thing to the Keeping It Modern. It will provide people money for doing planning and studies and sort of focus community action on protecting these resources.
He's the man to call when your modernist structure is in trouble. Thank you, Chandler. Thanks for joining us.
Exactly. My pleasure.
George and I were chatting with architectural conservationist Chandler McCoy. Michael Gilbride grew up in Brazil, Peru, and El Salvador, but he went to high school in McLean, Virginia.
Go Highlanders.
After graduating from Virginia Tech,
Go Cavaliers.
He worked for Universal Music Group, Condé Nast, and New York Magazine before becoming executive director of fashion and luxury at the New York Times. I didn't even know there was such a job. After earning a degree in interior architecture at Parsons, he founded Michael Gilbride Design, a firm that creates inspirational spaces and leverages new technologies and methods. Our conversation topic with Michael today is on AI and how it's affecting design. And for public safety, we are lucky today to only be hearing Michael, because if we saw him ripped in his favorite Speedos, which you can see on Instagram, some of us would be swooning. Hi, Michael.
Hi, George. How are you?
Yeah,
good.
No,
you found my private Instagram.
We did. We found all the Speedo shots, Michael.
Oh, Lord.
I know people will be clicking away to that right now.
Well, all I can say is, you can look good after 40. Just keep eating well and staying hydrated.
Michael, before we get started on AI and design, I understand that you and your husband got married in matching snakeskin tuxes. Now, how did that decision come about?
My partner is not one to really go deep into fashion and get dressed, so getting him to put on a suit for any function is a good wrestle. But when we were figuring out what we were going to wear, we wanted to go with a dress code because we were one of those weddings that was postponed due to the pandemic. And we wanted people to come and have a really great time and be their best selves. So we decided to have the dress code be Upstage the Bride.
Huh?
And we didn't want to let ourselves be upstage because we were supposed to be the brides. So we went down to Nashville and worked with a gentleman at Any Old Iron. He does all of the red carpet and stage looks for all the Nashville musicians. And he designed us this beautiful snakeskin sequin tuxedos that were just showstoppers.
How many snakes does it take to make a snakeskin tuxedo?
Well, it wasn't all snake. It was mostly snakeskin pattern on sequin. No snakes were actually hurt for that.
Oh, that's a relief.
Well, PETA will be relieved, yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Now, despite these elaborate outfits, though, you were not the most outrageous designs of the day.
Correct. We did not want to be. There were actually some people who showed up in their own wedding dresses. They dusted them out of their protective casing. And one of my girlfriends, even who's pregnant, showed up in her wedding dress and caused a scene.
Oh,
what kind of scene?
She, trying to run down the aisle and pretend like the baby was one of ours.
Wow, you had drama too.
Oh, man. I'm sorry I missed this.
It was part of the fun. It was a good time because we'd already done the Zoom wedding just to get all of our paperwork sorted through the pandemic.
Right.
And one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure that people didn't have to sit through a ceremony again. So we kept everything really tight to the things that people love. The walk down the aisle, the hello, how are you? Sorry for all the people who passed away. And then the kiss. And we got the heck out of there.
And went to the party.
Yeah, the ceremony was probably under 3 minutes flat.
That's how they should be sometimes. They can be a little long. I went to a Russian Orthodox wedding one time. I think it clocked in about 2 hours.
Oh, yeah. Well, the Catholics are good at that, too.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you've ever been to a Catholic church and opened up the program to see a cantor, you're going to be there for a while.
Yeah.
You became the head of fashion and luxury at the New York Times, which is a big deal. I'm wondering, when you achieve that level of notoriety and fame and connections, can you ever go out of your apartment in sweatpants and flip-flops?
Well, I did all the time. I had a very large dog, and that's when I would wear when I would walk him. But yeah, it is a fancy title, and you do work with incredibly talented people around the world, but you are allowed to dress down.
Well, that's good, because there's really no limit on some of these fashion decisions. I mean, I'm seeing, as just a mere mortal here, you've got, watches that are $40,000 just by themselves.
Yeah.
Not to mention the clothing that goes along with them. It's pretty incredible.
Well, as much as I love the industry and I was very well compensated during that time, I couldn't afford a lot of the things that I was working with and working for. But the challenge is to look good and to have clothes that fit you well. And there would be times where me and my team, and sometimes my boss, who was probably one of the chicest people I've ever met, we would try and figure out how we could come to work on a day where we didn't have meetings, not dressed to the nines, but still being chic. So we would not set like a cap on it, but we would try and make sure everything was from, like a fast fashion store or something that wasn't going to break the bank. But it was a really great experience with really talented people who I'm also in great touch with.
Now, how did you make the segue between the fashion industry and artificial intelligence and augmented reality?
So I was actually on the advertising side of the business. So at the New York Times, we're broken into, obviously, the editorial side, where all of the news is generated and covered, and the business side. So I represented all of the fashion and luxury verticals and any way that they wanted to reach that thoughtful person that reads the Times. And I was brought in there when the Times was going through a period of radical change. It was when it doubled down in subscriptions, in launching the food app, in launching the games, the podcasts, everything. And so I was on the front lines of educating all of these customers, our account-based fashion and luxury clients, about these new platforms, technologies, everything from, there was a VR app when I started working there that you could watch 360 videos.
I remember that.
And we would do branded videos with our advertisers. And I did our first ever augmented reality program with Ralph Lauren during the Olympics, where, we had all of these things where you could see how Olympians get their edge. And the editorial team had been working with them for months on these exclusives. And we would then bring the athletes who were wearing Ralph Lauren into the app so that you could see the detail of the clothing that they were wearing. It was pretty cool stuff.
So that's still a little ways from artificial intelligence. How do you get there?
This is the thing with artificial intelligence and AI and all of these emerging technologies, they all play into each other. And although they're slightly separate, and I think it might be helpful to break down the vocabulary of AI, because it's such a broad encompassing scope that people immediately go from AI to HAL 9000 in the 2001 Space Odyssey. And there's a range of places we can go there.
And don't forget Skynet with Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's going to take out humanity.
Well, Skynet might be past HAL. That's even further into the future. But for my purposes, understanding these technologies and their limitations is really key. Like, for example, when the Times was doing all of the VR and AR stuff, all of my fashion clients wanted us to be able to shoot their runway show in 360 video and have it stream live.
Oh.
And,
they don't know how it works.
Well, no one knew how it worked at the times, and at the time, excuse me. And I would have to understand all of the intricacies of the technology so that I could say on the spot and not say, "Let me get back to you." This is a technology that it's going to take a week for us to splice together so that the models look appropriate, the clothing looks right. Any type of flash bulb or lighting change will screw up all of the cinematography.
Yeah,
all of those little nuanced details are important. And so understanding where AI is, where it stops and starts, along with AR, especially in the design business.
Augmented reality.
Sorry, I'm doing all the acronyms. It's really helpful to understand because even traditional designers and architects, when they show a client a render, if it's not photorealistic and static, a client might have a ton of questions about the materiality. It's not always super perfect. So you have to make sure that everyone understands that objects in mirror may be slightly larger than they appear.
Yeah.
This last year has been just an explosion in the news, in magazines, TV, about AI bots. ChatGPT being an instance, Bard being one. There are lots of them out there. When did you first start playing around with these tools?
We've all been playing with these tools for a while. There's a little bit of a new phase right now with these language learning models, but if you have an email account, you've been using AI with your spam filter. Uh-huh. If you've been watching Netflix or Spotify, AI has been recommending what you should listen to and what you should watch.
Or buying anything on Amazon.
If you're using any navigation apps that are telling you where to go based off current traffic, those are all reactive machines. That's reactive AI that has no memory whatsoever and are very task specific. So if you open up a music app at a certain time of day, or you've been listening to recent music or recent genres, it'll recommend music based off of that. This new level that exploded everywhere, I think the real reason that it showed up is two reasons. One is that it's a larger data set, so you're not dealing with a small set. And I know it sounds really silly to say that the entire catalog of all music published is a small data set, but it is in the context of AI.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And second, this is the type of, when you would build any type of AI stuff before, you'd have to code it. And with ChatGPT and Bard and the competitors in that set, it's all just plain English.
Well, give us an example of what some of these things can do. I know that in one of the interviews with you, you talked about ChatGPT-4, which allowed users, and I find this amazing, to take a photo of what's in their refrigerator, and the program will recommend dinner recipes.
Yes. And I think that is one of the clearest examples of how far it has come. Now, for me, I want it to be able to do the pantry and the refrigerator at the same time.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to just eat what's in the fridge. But, that's a future iteration, right?
Well, and then the question is, will it be any good? Will you like what you make?
Well, and that's actually a great question, seriously, because there are people now saying, okay, algorithm, okay, ChatGPT, you've trained all of your recipe skills based off of my website. I want you to pay me every time you recommend one of my recipes.
Huh.
We're in such a wild, wild west right now of time that who knows if Martha Stewart launches an AI tool and she decides to take herself out of Bard or out of ChatGPT or out of Lambda, which is the one that Meta is building. And then she has her own one. And so now we're in this ecosystem of many different AI search engines, essentially, where you could take a photo of your refrigerator and ask you what to make.
But how do you take yourself out? I mean, the expression is with human beings that once you've seen something, you can't unsee it.
Right.
So how can an AI engine unlearn something?
Lawyers.
That's good.
I think a lawsuit is usually an easy way.
Yeah.
But it's happening in the art world right now. It's happening in the world of literature right now. It's really an interesting dynamic, but without getting too complicated. Within the context of design, one of the things that I like using this language learning models for, this generative AI set, is to take a transcript of one of my 2 or 3 hour meetings that I have with a client, where we've walked through every single detail of the project, every single piece of the scope. And while I have my notes and I have my memory, I have it recording so that I have a transcript and I put it into my project management system. That will, within a period of 20 seconds, spit back out key takeaways and next steps for my team.
And you're entering that in just into ChatGPT and saying, give me key takeaways from this conversation?
It's speech to text first, right?
Yeah.
So I use a piece of software called Otter.
Yeah.
That it can transcribe everything from phone calls to video meetings, even in-person meetings. And what it then, immediately after the meeting, it would send it to me. And for 2 years, I had no idea what to do with this thing because I rarely ever opened it again. I don't need to revisit every single word of that conversation. But once this came out, and my project management system that I use is called Notion.
How do you spell that?
Notion, Notion.
Oh, like I have a notion. Right.
Correct, yeah. And they have an AI add-on that you pay for, and it automatically takes your thing. You say, summarize this, give me key takeaways. And then I could share the whole meeting as a readout to the team, but I could also just share them what the key takeaways were and add my own notes like, oh, the bot missed X, Y, and Z. These were key priorities. Let's not forget that as well.
So when you load that Otter transcript into ChatGPT, what do you ask it to do for you?
Summarize the above.
Oh, it's that easy.
Wow.
It's that easy. Yeah. So that's why there's some excitement. Now, the funny thing about it is that it can't do math. So
that's surprising.
Yeah.
I mean, they're computers.
They're computers, but this isn't like the Google search engine algorithm. This is essentially a very well-trained BS machine.
Okay. Honest appraisal?
It doesn't give you the right answer. So, for example, I was trying to add a little element on my to-do list that would let me know if something was overdue or how many days I had left to work on something. And it would say, in 70% of the cases, this is due in 2 days, right? In 15% of the cases, it would say it was due in 1,046 days or something like that. And then in the last 5% where things were overdue and I hadn't just clicked that I'd done them, it would say that they were not due and this job would be completed in time.
Okay.
Wow.
That kind of math, I think I understand now.
Wow.
So, one of the things that every time I read something about how, AI is going to take our jobs, it's going to decimate the workforce, I disagree slightly. I think jobs will change, especially just with that example of how I've now saved myself an hour of time of just transcribing what the meeting was and giving a readout to the team. What's going to happen is that we're going to have to be much more curious and we're going to have to apply a lot of critical thinking. I liken it to an entry-level hire who hasn't been taught anything about the workforce yet.
An intern. Yeah, really smart intern.
Yeah, and who's very whip smart and who could get things done instantly, but you still got to course correct them.
Okay.
Michael, you've been playing around with a couple of tools, Midjourney and Static Diffusion. Tell our listeners about those two and some of the things they can do with them.
Sure. This is the part of generative AI. And when I say generative AI, this is something where you're asking it to do something and it gives you something back. That's literally what that class of artificial intelligence is. So with Midjourney, it's a very easy to use image generating tool. You could go in there and say, I would like a mood board for a traditional kitchen that is green with maple. And it'll shoot you back, a never ending cascade of different types of mood boards.
What's a mood board?
So a mood board is in the early stage of a design process. When you work with a client, you show them what your inspiration could be.
Okay.
So it's different kinds of traditional kitchens, maybe pulls, tiles, backsplashes, faucets for a kitchen, and it'll just kind of shoot out different things. And what's funny, because it's AI and it's still in this early stage, there's no real format for it. So it just kind of shoots things out. If you've been spending a lot of time on Instagram or TikTok, there are some artists who've been taking some really fun things of creating Gothic homes in the middle of the woods that look like a cross between Harry Potter and the Addams Family.
Oh, wow.
Okay. That's an interesting mood.
Yeah, and they bring it deeper and deeper and deeper. So I've seen it played with in a couple of different ways where you can use it in a practical sense for a job, and then you manipulate it a little further, or folks who really go for it and say, give me an underwater castle that's, run not by Atlantis, but run by, a vampire. Okay. And it really turns into something quite fantastic. Some people are using this Mid-Journey software as a way of taking their children's book idea and feeding it in there to create all of the images for their children's book.
Oh, wow.
Huh. Yeah, because
So
that's saving a lot of time.
But who owns that intellectual property then? Lawyers.
That's a big question. Yeah, lawyers. But right now, it seems that whoever is creating it, if you're paying for the credits to use it, it's yours. So static diffusion is a little bit more complicated to use. It's something that I really enjoy using, but I'm not great at it yet. It still takes me a little bit more time. But what it lets you do is take a image, or in my case, what I put in is my SketchUp drawings. So I'll take a 3D rendering that, if you're familiar with watching any of those home and garden shows where they give you like a walkthrough of a space, that's usually a SketchUp drawing. And so I'll put the basic geometry of a room, where a window is, a curtain, where a sofa would be. And then I put it in there and have it design something that's mid-century modern. And then I'll tweak the lighting a little bit. I'll tweak the plant in the background. I'll tweak, the rug that I'll put in there. And it can bring together a photorealistic render of a space in a period of 30 minutes.
That's incredible.
Yeah, normally that could take 4 weeks going back and forth with a renderer trying to get everything just right.
And then I suppose, too, that once you have the rendering, it's not that big a leap to make that 3D as a walkthrough.
Not yet. There's not enough computing power to push it to a full 3D walkthrough. That's still where it's great to have someone who knows how to apply all of those textures to the proper software.
Yeah.
But it is one of those things that as the computing power gets stronger, you'll be able to do stuff like that.
Okay.
Just from the perspective of, I want to say in January, when ChatGPT was really blowing up and everyone was using it to do all of their social media posts and write blog posts to try and farm out as much content as possible. That's initially what people were using it for. It cost the owners of ChatGPT $1 million a day for all of the server hits.
How does that work in terms of costs? I mean, you've either got the servers or you don't. You just don't go out and buy $1 million more every day. What's the cost there?
So normally most websites, and this is why Amazon is an unstoppable behemoth right now, their cloud-based server service is one of the ways that they have such a holdover financially right now. And so you're basically buying a frequency of server hits.
Okay.
And they're Amazon servers, right?
Right.
Amazon Web Services.
Right. So they're making money every time someone goes to a website. Netflix uses them. The government uses them. And what's really interesting about this model is that, ChatGPT is a free piece of software right now. ChatGPT 4, the one that you can take a photo of your refrigerator and have it spit you out something, you have to pay, $10 or $20 a month to access that level of intelligence.
Okay.
That level of cloud computing. And so that's where there are these unseen costs to a consumer that really stack up on the back end if you're running the company.
Well, this is a little bit like the web back in the 90s where every site was free. There were no paywalls. And then as it got busier, somebody figured out how to monetize it.
Yeah, and in many cases, it was advertising that started it. Some people call that the original sin of the internet.
And porn.
Well,
thank you,
the
Tom.
funny thing is that porn is usually the leader in a lot of these technologies. And there was a Lisa Ling episode. I don't know if you're familiar with her show on CNN.
Yeah.
But she had an entire episode on AI chatbots and people building emotional or affectionate relationships with them and using them for support. And there's a whole industry that's building dolls, like real live dolls that will talk to you and flirt with you.
And aren't there also some older people with dementia? They're finding virtual friends.
It's totally possible.
Now, Michael, when a client comes to you, are they already aware that you have this interest in augmenting your practice with AI, or is it just a pleasant surprise they find out along the way?
Well, there's no real reason for them to know that I'm using this tool in the background. And in fact, it's not that I'm hiding it, because if they ask me about it or ask me how they can use it, I'm happy to share. Because the way that I see it being helpful, is in generating new ideas or helping me interrogate my design process. So, for example, when I work with a client in their space, I'll be thinking of a number of different ways of room layouts. I usually exhaust myself with around 8 or 9, and then I'll feed some into Midjourney or a couple of other softwares that exist out there to prove myself wrong and to maybe open up some of the constraints that I'd been thinking of. And then I will package that together to a client either through a drawing or a photorealistic render. It's not necessarily a shortcut. It's just another way of bouncing ideas off myself.
So I have a question for you. I've posed this to people before. Which is harder to deal with? A client that doesn't know much about design or a client that knows too much about design?
The toughest client is a client who doesn't know that their budget can't meet their expectations.
Okay. Unrealistic expectations.
It's not that they know too much or know not enough. It's the not knowing how much everything costs. And I think, especially in this space, there's some interior design AI staging websites that are positioning themselves as going to kill off the entire interior design industry. Yeah. And until they add a budget slider, that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen.
I think that's important because that really is endemic of so many initial conversations, both in interior design and architecture, is people just don't know how much something costs.
Yeah, it's budget and timing. And if you don't have the stomach for it or you don't have the wallet for it, you're not going to get that beautiful dreamscape that was just printed for you. And so part of the job is setting expectations around, the taste that you like and where it's appropriate to do in your home or restaurant, given the budget and timing that you have.
During the 2000s and the 2010s, there was a real push for people to have larger houses up into the sort of McMansion area. Has that stopped at all? Are people getting smaller or are they still going larger?
I haven't really seen a difference in that. I think people are still trying to buy the most amount of house that they can afford. Mm-hmm. I have a place in upstate New York where the market is still incredibly hot. And people are spending a crazy amount of money for houses that aren't worth what they are, thinking that they can renovate it, but it's just going to be even more money that they won't recoup, because if you put $2 million into a house, it doesn't necessarily increase the value of it by $2 million.
Right.
And that's a big gamble.
And that's a huge gamble, unless, $2 million isn't a lot of money to you. But then in the city, I've seen that there are places that have gone for a small amount that go much faster than the ones that are in the, $2 million range.
Michael, thanks so much for joining us. It really has been a pleasure to talk with you, and I'm sure our fans will enjoy watching you in your Speedos.
Oh, great. Thanks so much.
We were talking to Michael Gilbride.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. Okay, Tom, we are done for the day.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.2 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl, with Kelly Policelli on guest research. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guilde. George and I'll be back soon with another organically intelligent edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.